Hello and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn and welcome to another episode of In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. So let's get going. This week's song is Roud 34, which is Child Ballad number 43, The Broomfield Wager. Later on, we'll hear from our singer guest Rachael McShane, but for now, let's take a look at the song's history with returning historical contributor Brian Peters. Well, hello and welcome back to In the Roud. Brian Peters, hello.
Hiya, Matt. Good to be with you again.
Hi, great to have you back and looking forward to diving into this song. This is a fantastic song. We last had you on the podcast towards the end of last season, in season 3 for the Sir Lionel episode.
Oh, yes.
It was excellent stuff. So yeah, we're how's things? How have you been?
Oh, things are okay. I've been away doing a couple of gigs down south, and I'm still researching on several different fronts at once. So as usual, busy, and I'm in a band playing cover versions in pubs as well at the moment. So I've got to rehearse with them every so often.
Excellent, lovely stuff. Well, I'm glad you were able to carve time in your busy schedule for some intense folk song nerdery.
Yeah, well, it's always a pleasure. As you know, I tend to prefer songs that I already sing or at least already know something about, and a lot of these seem to have turned out to be actually child ballads in the ones I've done for you, which may or may not be a coincidence.
Well, you have done you have done talks before on child, haven't you? Child ballads and things, and didn't you do it? My memory might be failing me. Did you do a whole album like specifically of child ballads?
I did a whole album of it, and there was a sort of live presentation to go with it,
right?
Which
Yeah.
I still do occasionally.
Oh, well, there we go. Oh, we better have that on the Patreon at some point as a spotlight episode as well. Francis James Child.
Yeah, indeed.
Anyway, we're here today. The Broomfield Wager, Roud 34. And Child Ballad 43. Nice palindromic set of numbers there. So this is a song that I've been aware of for a long time. It's nice to come back to something I'm familiar with, having done 2 weeks. We've just had Kempi K and Hindet in, and I was just familiar with Kempi K because of the Martin Carthy King Napperty, which you also recorded as well. You were mentioned in that episode.
Oh, thank you.
And then Hindet last week, are barely aware of it at all. So it's nice to come back to a song that at least I am very familiar with. So.
Yeah, and me.
The Broomfield Wager, also called the Broomfield Hill. So start us off as always. What are we dealing with in this song? Give us a plot synopsis.
Okay, with the usual caveats that there'll always be one version somewhere that doesn't have a particular feature in it, but the basics of most of the versions are it centres around a wager that's made between a young man who's sometimes a squire or a knight or sometimes actually has a name, and a young woman, and he generally proposes the wager, and that she is to go to the Broomfield, the merry Broomfield, the merry green broom. She's to go to this weird space that people know about, these kind of things called a liminal space, where kind of weird stuff happens. And she's to go there and return again with her maidenhead still intact. And the implication is always that he is going to be there as well, but that is not always stated. The terms of the wager are: you will go to the merry green broom, and a maid you will not return, and then she says basically the same verse occurs, and she says, "A maid and I will go to the merry green broom, and a maid I will return again." So what their relationship is before that, well, again, it's implied that they are a sort of romantic pairing, because he is often described as her true love, although we don't hear whether she is his true love. So whether this is mutual or not exactly sure. But there are a couple of older versions where he is described as her master, and whether that is just sort of a patriarchal demand for deference or whether he is actually her employer, I think that would be stretching a point to claim the last one. Anyway, so there are these two. There is this young couple. A wager is proposed. Generally, in most of the versions, he offers her quite generous odds. He offers to lay down maybe £500 to her one, or sometimes it's 500 to 10, sometimes it's 5 guineas to 1. So it's a sort of attractive offer, but of course he's very confident of winning the bet. So she goes down to the Broomfield. She finds him asleep. She usually then performs a set of rituals, and these rituals characteristically involve the magical numbers of 3 or 9, and the kind of things she usually does, as you and many of the listeners will know. She will walk 9 times around the soles of his feet, 9 times around the crown of his head, 9 times she will kiss him on his red rosy lips. So there are those rather ritualistic formulae which may or may not have a wider significance. She generally leaves something behind, a token, so that when he wakes, he will know that she was there, and of course that will help her in claiming her winnings. Often this token is a ring which is left on his breast, or she puts it on his thumb or his finger. Eventually, after she has either departed or sometimes gone to hide in the bushes nearby, he wakes up. And he then starts complaining to all and sundry that they have failed to wake him up in time to meet the young woman and win the bet. So the characters that he complains to are quite often a series of animals. It's implied that he's out hunting. So sometimes there's a goshawk and a hound and a horse, and he goes to each of them in turn and says, "Why didn't you wake me up, guys?" And sometimes there is also a manservant who he complains to, and all of these characters make various excuses as to why they failed to wake him up. And the horse will say, "Well, I shook my head and made my bridles ring, and you didn't wake up." And the goshawk made whatever sort of croaking noises goshawks may. I'm not an expert in the field. Anyway, all of that is to no avail. He didn't wake up, so she has won the wager. Now, it doesn't always stop there, because many versions then have this kind of a coda. And he says that if he'd been awake when she had arrived, basically he would have had his will with her. He would have raped her, in other words. And often it gets even darker than that, because there is a threat that he would also murder her. It's not always made explicit, just occasionally it is. But there's this, again, a formula that occurs in a lot of versions of this song in one form or another, which was that the birds will have their fill of her flesh and or her blood. And that's all kind of very sinister, but in quite a lot of versions, she seems to almost laugh it off. She doesn't really take it seriously, and there's a sort of kind of mocking reply. "Oh dear, how could you say that? Your heart, it must be hard as any stone to go and murder your true love." And so it's a bit strange, that last section, and I'm not quite sure whether it's supposed to be a joke or not. You know, he has this sort of petulant outburst because he's lost the bet, saying, "Well, I'd have bloody killed you and raped you," and then she just sort of says, yeah, bless," kind of thing. I don't know if that's the true interpretation or not, but that is there in an awful lot of the versions from oral tradition anyway. So
Sure.
before I finish, this is actually quite a long section on the plot, because I think it's also quite important to decide whether it is actually a magical ballad or whether she just got lucky on the day because he happened to be a bit sleepy. So we're going to go slightly ahead of time to Child's Head Notes, which I always talk about, but not always at this point. He points out that most of the versions that he had access to in the 1890s didn't have any sort of rational reason for the prolonged sleep. But as Child points out, he needs to be asleep when the lady comes to him, else there would be no story. And his heavy slumber is not natural. I say there was no explanation in any of the versions. Actually, there was an explanation in at least one of the versions, which we'll come to. Then Child does his usual thing about he compares it with analogues from abroad and also from the past. He found quite an ancient text called the Romance of Dolopathos from about 1185, he says, which is actually quite a precise date for what he says is an approximation. And in that one, there is a young woman who is actually a student of magic who welcomes all these suitors to her bower, and she's placed the enchanted feather of a screech owl under the pillow. So,
that's good.
It's
That's
brilliant,
good. I
isn't
like
it?
that.
Yeah, you'd love to sort of try and shoehorn that into the Broomfield Hill ballad, really, wouldn't you? But it might be cheating. So, and then he finds a number of Scandinavian analogues, of course. That again, there's a young man or more than one young man who's been put to sleep by the young woman that they wish to take advantage of. The Scandinavian ones, quite often, it's the power of runes that are involved. There's an Icelandic version where she hides something which is called a sleep thorn inside the guy's clothing. So I guess the sleep thorn pricks him and magic ensues. It's suggested that, again, this sleep thorn might be something that's inscribed with runes. Finally, Child finds a German tale that is a bit more like the Broomfield Hill ballad as we know it. And in that one, a hunter meets the girl out on the heath and he takes her to his hut. In the morning, she remains a maid. He is angry and threatens to kill her. So there's a bit of an echo of that rather strange coda about the birds drinking her blood. But finally, in the German one, he spares her life. So ever since that point, people who've commented on this ballad have come to this question of whether it's magical or not. So we have Anne Gilchrist in the Journal of the Folk Song Society in 1907 reckoned that the use of the blossoms of the broom as a charm to keep the knight from waking during the lady's visit was a key factor in the plot. And Child, she basically got that idea from Child. But Anne Gilchrist, as was Lucy Broadwood, very interested in herbal refrains and flower charms in ballads. So she compares this to the Elfin Knight with the incantations about the parsley, sage, rosemary and thyme and so on. That was one of the other ones I talked about in this series. And so she thinks it's the broom blossom is one of these magical plants that is used for the spell. Then, of course, we come to all kinds of people have written sleeve notes or liner notes about recordings of this, because it's been recorded many, many times. So we have to go to Bert Lloyd, of course. He wrote that English folk singers had a special affection for this ancient ballad of the resourceful girl who, as early versions of the song make clear, has either bewitched or drugged the importunate fellow into his deep sleep. So again, he's very much, as Bert Lloyd would, go with the magical explanation to it. He was, of course, into the occult and paganism and so on. Mike Yates, commenting on the recording by Walter Pardon, again went to the magical properties of the broom plant. The flowers were supposed to have a narcotic perfume, says Mike Yates, and that these powers had been known for centuries. Brian Pearson, who was one of the critics group, wrote on the sleeve notes to Frankie Armstrong's wonderful CD, Till the Grass Grew or the Corn, which I think is also entirely composed of child ballads. He reckoned that over the years the magical elements have leaked away and the woman's grasp of gramarye, remember this wonderful word gramarye about the powers of the occult and magic. He says that as the magical elements disappeared, the woman's magical powers are now barely hinted at in more recent versions. And again, John Howson, I'm sure you're going to be talking about Gordon Hall's version, but John Howson commented on that much of the earlier witchcraft had been edited out in the broadside version. So there you are. That's a rather long and wordy summary of the plot. As I say, it's long and wordy because some parts of it are quite ambiguous.
Before we start picking things apart, what's so is was this a particularly sort of popular and widespread song? Is it very commonly found, or is it sort of, or is it not?
Reasonably commonly found. I'm just looking for my Bronson count here. I mean, I've got the questions in the wrong order in my prepared notes.
Oh
Okay,
yeah. Oh, I think I noted. Well, yeah, essentially 24
yeah,
tunes in Bronson, or 30, depending on how you look at it.
yes, I've found it now, and Bronson's
Yeah.
24 were nearly all English. There was one Scottish one which actually corresponds to Child 43D, which happened to have a tune. Otherwise, of course, it wouldn't have gone into Bronson's traditional tunes of the child ballads. And there's one in there from Utah. And then Bronson adds to those 24 an appendix with 6 variants of the song that's quite familiar in the British folk scene, the Maid on the Shore or the Maid on the Rocky Old Shore, which all of those came from the north, which side is it? Northeastern part of the American landmass from the Canadian Maritimes and the state of Maine. And Bronson described the Maid on the Shore as a curious marine adaptation of the Broomfield Hill ballad. I don't think it's the same song at all myself.
No, it's got similarities, but it's not the same.
Yeah, there's this sort of similar motif of somebody, obviously wants to get to bed with a maid, and she sends not only the captain, the amorous captain, but also the whole crew to sleep. But she does it by singing, and then she steals all of his treasure, which isn't really a part of the Broomfield Hill. And I can't see any similarities in the text that make me think it's really an adaptation or just basically another song on the same kind of theme.
Indeed, yes. So if anyone looks at Bronson, there's 30 tunes, but then numbers 25 to 30 are Made on the Shore, whereas 1 to 24
Yeah.
are Broomfield Hill, etc.
Yeah. So in addition to those, we have Child's 6 texts, which isn't a vast amount for Child. We can certainly think of ballads where there were far more than that. And then there were the ones that Bronson missed. And sometimes he missed them, as in 2 or 3 versions from the USA, because again they were notated without tunes, so they were of no interest to him. But he also missed some from collections that he didn't have access to, or some that were even collected after his time. So, as usual, he doesn't have the ones that were collected by James Madison Carpenter in England and Scotland at the end of the 1920s, and he doesn't have the ones that have been recorded more recently. This is actually a ballad where, unusually, we've got, when we look at the traditional recordings, we're going to find quite a number from England, but nothing from America, and that is certainly, with the child ballads I've dealt with in your series, that's actually quite rare.
Yes. I was surprised by that myself. I did a quick tally of in the Roud Index. As
Yeah.
always, I always go and look at how many entries there are. Um, in the Roud Index, we have. Whoops! I'll find the right page. There we go. 232 entries in the Roud Index, but obviously take into account duplicates, triplicates, same versions turning up in different publications, and then there are a further 30 entries in the Broadside Index as well. So
Mm.
it takes the whole total to 262, but in the Folk Song Index, 232.
Yeah.
And then if you edit that down, I did whittle that down in terms of I just filtered it through the word audio, and there's 30 entries in the Roud Index for this song of audio recordings.
Yeah.
But then I did whittle that down to the number of singers, and that's 9 different, in quotes, traditional singers. To amass 30 entries of recordings, So
Yeah, well, I know we've talked before, and you've talked to your other guests about the duplication in the Roud index, which, as we've said before, is not a weakness in the index. It's doing what it's set up to do. But I find, as a very, very rough rule of thumb, you can more or less divide them by 3 to get a rough idea of how many discrete versions there are there. But that is very, very rough.
So maybe about oh, I just do my calculator. 232 divided by 3, 77.333. So there may be just under 80 different
Yeah.
versions possibly.
Possibly, it's a very rough rule of thumb because sometimes you'll find that there's a particular song that's been so um, cherished by compilers and collectors that it's been the same version has been printed, a dozen or more times, and that really slews
Yeah.
the count. But generally, I find divide by three isn't a bad ballpark.
And you've got to take into account that one entry is in fact the link to the traditional ballad
Yes,
index
true.
entry of the song. So there's always one like that, and yeah. So there's all sorts of things you have to take into
Mm.
consideration when going through that. Oh, and there we go. I've just almost answered my next question. I scrolled down the first page of entries, and I've happened across the one that's labelled earliest reference entry, and that's usually my next question is how far back can we trace it? And that's one thing I found on the Roud index. If you type in 34 into, there's a little section called search by Roud number, and you can just type in 34 into there and it brings them all up.
Mm.
But if you do it on the main search bit, type 34 in, but then click on field and find the Roud number field so that you're essentially doing it a slightly longer way around by telling it to search for the number 34 within the Roud numbers.
Yeah.
And but then if you do search within the field of titles and type in the word earliest, it'll bring up the earliest reference entry for Roud number 34.
Hmm.
Which is what I just did. And so my next question is always how far back can we trace it? And so I think I found it. The Merry Broomfield or the West Country Wager in the Bodleian Ballads.
Yeah, I think
Is that
I think
right?
we're in agreement on that. I am going to enter there is this rather slim possibility that Child mentions that there is this song that was around in the 16th century in
Oh,
the Complaint of Scotland, that publication from 1549 that we've mentioned before, and was also in a stage play. And this was called Broom, Broom on Hill. And he speculates, well, is this possibly a version of the Broomfield Hill? He then prints some lines from it, and it goes, broom, broom on hill, the gentle broom on hill, hill, broom, broom on hive hill, the gentle broom on hive hill, the broom stands on hive hill. I mean, it's not really advancing the narrative very much, that is it.
no, it's almost reminiscent, vaguely, even tangentially, of kind of which song it is. But the oh, the broom, the bonny bonny broom, the broom I love so well. It's sort of
Yeah,
there might be a link there rather than with this
yeah,
one. But
exactly. So I think that is extremely flimsy. So then we're back to this black letter broadside. I think the earliest printing is Thomas Norris at the Looking Glass on London Bridge. Is
that's right. And the Roud Index entry says date collected between 1709 and 1712.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a slightly more precise set of dates and slightly earlier than I've got, but I'm not going to argue with Steve on that. So, and so that yeah, that is the earliest one we can find. And as you've already mentioned, there were really quite a lot of broadside printings of that from the beginning of the 18th century right up to sort of just after the midpoint of the 19th century. But one of the other things that was slightly anomalous here is that the text never really changed because when we've looked at one or two of these things before, like the Demon Lover, for instance, you find that there's an old broadside, but then it gets edited down quite a lot in subsequent printings. That happened as well with things like the Golden Vanity. The 19th century copies are really quite condensed and often rewritten quite a bit, whereas this one carried on being printed with more or less the same text all the way through. Would it be jumping the gun to go through the basics of that text, or do you want me to save that for a later section?
Let me see. Where did we get to in there? No, I think that's all right. I was just about to say that. Yeah, the 30 entries in the broadside index. I just scanned through them all. They all have the title "The Merry Broomfields" or "The West Country Wager," apart from two right down at the bottom of the page. One called Merry Broomfield, Broomfield being one
Hmm.
word, and then one called The Merry Broomfields without the or the West Country Wager bit. So yeah, it seems to have retained that title at least.
Yeah,
And and basically, I've just a quick scan of all those opening lines because it always gives you the first line as an extra way of whittling down what you're looking for. Essentially, it all starts with a noble young squire that lived in the West.
that's right. That was precisely my. I've notated that as well. I'll take it a little bit further from there. The noble young squire that lived in the West. He courted a young lady gay, and as he was merry, he put forth a jest, a wager with her he would lay. So he's
Ah,
obviously taken the initiative here. So
yeah,
I've kind of what I've tried to do is pick out the various sort of key lines in the text that occur again and again and see where they start to crop up. So in that broadside version, which, as we've said, stayed constant for maybe 150 years, the amount of the wager is £100 I and 10. So that's the total amount of the wager. It's not that it's my £100 to your 10. It's I'm betting you £100, £110. And then presumably, if whoever wins it, that's what they have to pay out. She has to go
yeah.
to the Merry Broomfields, will not return a maid again. He goes to sleep through natural causes. There's no hint of magic in it. There's no mention of walking around his head 3 times or 9 times. Well, all that happens is she arrives, finds him asleep, leaves a ring on his hand, on his right hand, and also some perfume. That's the tokens that she's been there. Then he wakes up, he asks these questions of the hawk, the hound, and the serving man, why didn't you wake me up? And the serving man tells him this is this formula, this crops up again and again. Actually, master, there's a bit of advice for you, pal. You should sleep more in the night and wake more in the day. I think you had an interpretation of that, didn't you?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit. I say a little bit, a bit later on about the magnificent version from Gordon Hall, because I can, and he has the thing about that verse or something similar about asking his page, his manservant, where were you that would not watch and waken me till the maid skipped over the lea, and he has the page says, now I prodded and I shook, master. Now I have this to say. If you lay still when you lay in bed at night, then you would not sleep through the day. And I always thought, it seemed to me that meant the page saying, well, if you wouldn't spend all your nights, sleeping with lots of people, then you might actually be awake during the day. You could sleep during the night and you'd be awake in the daytime.
Yeah,
You know.
actually, I get that because there's that little key phrase in it. If you would lay still during the night, in other words, if you weren't kind of bouncing up and down so much, I suppose. Wow.
Yeah, that's always what it seemed to me, and I always thought it was quite amusing. And I hadn't done enough research to know whether that was just like that, through doing some bits of research into Gordon Hall stuff. So much of quite a lot of stuff that Gordon Hall had was like in terms of turns of phrase and things was kind of made up by himself, and I didn't know whether that was something. It sounded like something he could have come up with, but if it turns up in other versions, then that's fine as
I
well.
think the formula about you should try sleeping more in the night and staying awake during the day is really quite common. I don't think I've come across that. Don't stir so much during the night. That
You
might be the
lay
one.
still. Yeah, I've just found a version actually that. Sorry, we'll go back to the broadside in a second. The in the book, "The Idiom of the People" by James Reeves, which is English traditional verse from the manuscript of Cecil Sharp, and there's a version in here, the Broomfield Wager, and it ends with, "Oh, he calls upon his serving man. Why hasn't thou wakened me? With my voice I hallooed, master, and my bells I rung." Uh, and then he says, "Yeah, if I'd been awake when my true love were here, I know I'd have had my will, etc." And then the page says, "Sleep more in the night, master, and wake more in the day, and then you will see your true love come and when she goes away."
Yeah, I think
So,
that is the general formula for that verse.
sure, yeah. Right, continue where you left off,
Yeah.
where we
Okay.
were.
So we're nearly at the end now. When the manservant has offered him this piece of advice, he's sad to have lost, but no more than sad. And the young woman laughs and explains that actually she'd been hiding in the bushes and watching him. And she concludes lightheartedly, "The money is mine, and the wager I fairly have won." And there's no unpleasantness, no petulant outburst, no death threat. So that's the way the broadside ends. And well, the interesting thing is, as we'll probably come to, is that although elements of that broadside, particularly the stuff about the hawk, the hound, and the servant man, occur again and again in the oral versions, there are elements from the broadside, like that concluding verse, "The money is mine, the wager I have won," don't actually crop up in a lot of the oral versions, and nor does the opening bit about "there was a young squire." So, where next?
Right. Where next, indeed. Yeah. So what's basically? I think we essentially go through some because there are variations within different versions, aren't there? And things. I've got a pile of books here, each with a version of this song, and I now can't remember which version it is that mentioned a different price.
Yeah, there are a few.
Oh, there we go. It's the same one in the idiom of the people, which I think is mostly from a singer in Bridgewater in 1907 that has 1,000 guineas to one.
That's good odds.
Yeah, but better than pounds, I suppose. Yeah, and so, but I mean, usually it's £100. Although I'll come back to Gordon Hall later, but Gordon Hall's was seems to be wagering people. One wager, I will lay unto thee 100 bright nobles to your 10.
That's interesting. Or is it possible that nobles is some kind of ancient form of currency? Because we do have a different coin in one of the child versions. So
Oh, okay, maybe.
rubles. He's going to pair in rubles.
Rubles, nobles, or maybe he's got far too many serving men,
Yeah,
and he's willing to bet 100 of them against 10 of
well, could
hers.
be.
But she doesn't have 10, which is why she wins, and she gets 100 bright nobles. And so, yeah, that's an interesting discrepancy in a way with other versions, and it'll be fascinating to know what happened to that one
Yeah.
in there. But yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Well, I'm going to look at mentioning the child ones. It's usually my first port of call when the Roud song is also in child as we go through the child versions because they tend to be the older ones. So
Yeah.
we've got his A version is from Scott's Minstrelsy. Notice that that's the Minstrelsy as published, which Child had his suspicions about, to say the least. He always tried to get hold of stuff from Scott's original manuscripts if he possibly could, but here, for whatever reason, he hasn't managed to. So we start off with a knight and a lady bright who had a true tryst at the Broom. So it was specific there that they had intended to meet there. But the interesting thing about this one is that there is no wager. There is no offers of guineas or pounds. No money is put at stake. It was just that they were going to be meeting there, and she just the young woman just tells the mother, "Uh-oh, I think I could be in a bit of trouble here if I go to meet him at Broomfield Hill." And maybe it's reminiscent of versions of Lord Thompson Fairellender. Shall I go to the Broomfield Hill or shall I stay at home? That's quite a common formula in Lord Thomas.
Oh yes, consulting the
Yeah.
mother for advice. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So she's worried that if she goes to the Broomfield Hill, then her maidenhead is gone. So as luck would have it, from the room upstairs, there happens to be the resident witch woman who overhears the conversation, and she says, "Ah, well, I've got some advice for you that will get you out of this sticky situation. If you place a broom flower at his head and feet and put a ring from off his right hand, he will sleep through it all, and you'll escape with your maidenhead." So that's what she does. She this is another slightly dodgy element to this Scots minstrelsy version. She went and pulled the bloom flower from Hive Hill. Now, if you remember, Hive Hill was in that version from the 16th century, "Broom, broom on Hive Hill," that rather tedious one. And Child definitely implies that Walter Scott has taken that Hive Hill and inserted it into his ballad to make a connection with the Complaint of Scotland, I suppose. So that is a little bit iffy. Anyway, we go through to the usual sequence about him criticising his animals for not waking him up. In this case, it's a hawk and a horse. I don't think there's a hound involved. And the horse says, "Well, I tried my best, master. I stamped my foot and I made my bridle ring." And the hawk says, "I clapped my wings and I rang my bells." So again, there's a slightly oddity at the end. The knight sends his horse to seek after the maid who's making good her escape. And let's see if I can find the exact quote here. "Haste and haste, my good white steed, to come the maiden till, or all the birds of good green wood of your flesh shall have their fill." So this is the usual formula about the birds will drink your blood and eat your flesh, but he's directing it at the horse, not at the woman. And when Anne Gilchrist wrote this article in the Journal of Folk Song Society in 1907, she reckoned that this was the original. This was what the verse should have been, and that all the other myriad versions in which it's aimed at the young woman were all some kind of corruption of threat that was originally aimed at the horse. I'm not convinced of that. Child quotes a scholar by the name of Dixon, who seems to have believed that Scott based his version on the broadside, although if he did, there are an awful lot of differences from the broadside. And I have to say, I'm a little bit sceptical about the witch woman in Scott's version. Maybe there was. It's a very... I don't know if invoking a witch actually counts as rationalisation, but if you know what I mean, it's like filling in a plot hole, isn't it? And it would be quite convenient to do. So,
sure.
If we go to the oldest oral version that Child lists is from Hurd's Ancient and Modern Scots songs, which I'm sure we've dealt with in this series before, and that just piles straight in with I'll wager with you. This is where we come to the currency 500 merks and 10, and of course I had to go to Google and look up what a merk was. It was a Scottish coin of the late 16th century or early 17th century that was valued at 2/3 of £1. Is the fact that the coin is of an older vintage, does that mean that version of the ballad goes back that far, or possibly somebody's inserted an older form of currency to make it sound older? I'm sorry, I tend to be a bit cynical about some of this stuff from the Romantic period. They were some of them were medievalists, and they like to make it sound as if things were medieval when they weren't really. They weren't really. Hurd's text is quite short. There's no witch woman, although there is the strowing of bloom blossoms on his, actually not on around his head, but on his hasbone, which is on his collarbone. And then there are verses about the horse and the horse making excuses, but there's no threat to the horse. And then there's this rather odd verse at the end. "Now I may sing as dreary a song as the birds sung on the briar." This is the young man feeling dreary and doleful. "My true love is far removed, and I'll ne'er see her mair." So there's no witch woman in that, and that is quite an old one. There's no witch woman in the broadside. There's no witch woman in Hurd's Ancient and Modern Songs that was published in 1769. So that makes me just a little bit sceptical about Walter Scott.
Sure, yeah.
Child 43C is from Peter Buchan, Ancient Ballads and Songs of Northern Scotland, 1828. And Child was very suspicious of Buchan's stuff, and he thinks that Buchan has pulled the witch woman out of Scots minstrelsy, and he says he reckons that Buchan's nicked other verses from elsewhere as well. But what he doesn't do is say, actually, this whole version is a fake. He says, I think it's genuine, but that Buchan has padded it out with verses from elsewhere. Buchan was a bit of a kind of Gordon Hall of his day. If you look at the versions of ballads from his book that Child uses, they're always much longer than everybody else's, with lots more detail. And Child reckoned he was doing exactly what Gordon Hall did, and adding bits to make the best version he properly could. So
sure.
Buchan has the greyhound, the horse and the hawk and the merry men all blamed for not waking the chap up. And then Buchan has, this is one of the earliest sightings of Had I been waked when she was nigh, and to her got my will, I shouldna cared upon the morn the small birds of her were fill. So that's the birds will eat her flesh.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that's quite an early sighting of that. We have a version from George Kinloch, Ancient Scottish Ballads, who again Child often uses his versions. The fella has a name in this one. His name is Lord John, but it piles straight into the narrative with I'll wager, says Lord John, 100 merks. Again, the merks, 100 merks and 10. And then it's quite a short version. There's the usual stuff about the animals. There's no hint of magic or ritual. He just takes a nap and oversleeps. And there's a lovely line here. I don't know where this came from. A stanza, I should say, not a line. But sound was the sleep he took, for he slept till it was noon, and his lady came at day, left a token, and away, gaed as licht as a glint o' the moon. That's lovely, that, isn't it? She went as light as a moonbeam, basically, and she's saying,
Yeah. That's fantastic. I've not come across that before.
"Yeah, well, I've already recorded one version of this, and I'm thinking of doing another one, and I might steal that line. You never know. This is what we do. We're all following in the footsteps of Bert Lloyd. a bit of a collage." So there's another version, Child E, from Joseph Robertson's notebook. I'm afraid I don't know who Joseph Robertson was. Again, there's no actual magic, but there is this bit of ritual in it. Sometimes she went to the crown of his head, sometimes to the soles of his feet, rather than 9 times. And then there's Merry Men and the Hawk all getting the blame, but there's no death threat. And version F is the broadside that we've already talked about, with a slight digression, because Child credits it as coming from the Douce Ballads, or possibly the Douse Ballads. And that was a collection of ballads that I think was in the Bodleian Library, but I had to look up Francis Douce on Wikipedia. He was at one time the keeper of the manuscripts in the British Museum, and he resigned in 1811, and there's this amazing resignation letter that you can see on Wikipedia with 13 separate reasons why he's dissatisfied with his job. Overbearing management, the repulsive behaviour of fellow members, the fiddle-faddle requisition of incessant reports which inform of nothing. I mean, that's a very familiar thing in today's world of bureaucracy. And then there was this complaint: "The apartments I reside in are dangerously cold in winter and like an oven in summer. The whole is damp, especially the lower room where my books are in great jeopardy, in which I never entered, even in summertime, without being sensibly affected with some kind of pain or unpleasant sensation. The general unwholesomeness of the air from sinks, drains, and the ill-contrived and filthy water closet were just too much to bear." So that is a great resignation letter. And I know we went way off topic, but I thought it was worth a minute's recitation.
Yep, that's very good indeed. So yeah, the full 19 verses are there for that one, isn't it? In the in version F.
19, yeah, indeed.
And I just spotted the last verse I've not come across before, which is the maiden singing, be cheerful, and do not rejoice, for now 'tis as clear as the sun. The money is mine, the wager I fairly have won."
Yeah. Again, that's quite a nice concluding verse. If you're looking for to sing a version without some ghastly threats of murder and have a happy ending instead, then that might be your pick.
Absolutely.
So then, shall I continue?
Sure, yeah, why not? This is what we're here for.
I like the way you said "sure, why not" with this kind of doleful voice. Oh,
Sure,
God, how long?
why not? Oh dear. No, it's all right. It's absolutely fine. Keep going.
Okay, so we've already talked a little bit about Bronson. There are a whole bunch of them from Somerset, which is quite interesting. They're all, not surprisingly, I suppose, collected by Cecil Sharp, which, of course, he was a very assiduous collector, so in a way it's not surprising. But although there were all of these from Somerset, the other collectors didn't seem to have found it nearly as often as Sharp did. Bronson, as we were mentioning, talks about common ground between the various tunes. He always liked to group his tunes together. So there was
Yes.
he characterised a particular tune that was common to many of these Somerset versions, which I've notated here, and I'm going to attempt to sing because I know we have some of your listeners who like to hear about the tunes, and there isn't really one of the recordings that we can send them to that uses this tune. It seems to.
Actually, there isn't, is there? That's quite right. I hadn't realised that because I'd noted down that versions 1 through 12 in Bronson
Hmm.
have essentially the same melody or variations of, and I've not come across that melody in any of the field recordings.
No, I haven't either. Well, I'll give you a little sample. And this was the version sung by a Mr. William Briffett at Bridgewater in 1907. I think if you look at Cecil Sharp's photographs on the Vaughan Williams Library site, you'll find a splendid
Yeah.
photograph of Mr. Briffett.
And this is version 4 in Bronson,
Okay,
isn't it?
so it
Yeah.
goes. A squire, he lived in the woods. He courted a lady gay a little while, and he passed a joke, and in wager he did lay. So
That's quite a sturdy tune.
it's all right, isn't it? Bronson was very taken with the what he calls the mid cadence on the upper octave, which it's all sort of very jargon laden, but it's basically that one. Courted a lady he gay, and all of those Somerset tunes finish on that high octave note at that point.
Indeed, yeah.
So, and then I sort of went through the versions in Bronson. Only one of them had the fella described as a squire, as he is in the broadside. Nearly all of them pile straight in with a wager, a wager. There were 8 of the versions had these ritualistic behaviour of the 9 times or the 3 times walking around his head and feet. There were actually, if we really want to know, there were 3 examples of 9 times, 4 examples where she walks around 3 times, and 1 where it's 3 times around the feet, 6 times around the head, and 9 kisses on the lips or something similar. So,
Well, for folk songs do love to be incremental, don't
yeah,
they?
I quite like the 369 thing. The servant man gets blamed 8 times. The birds have their fill of her flesh, or are threatened to 8 times. But as we've said, Bronson was not exhaustive. There are 2 versions in Bronson from Gavin Gregg's collection, and those are quite interesting. I'm not going to attempt to sing those because I've not prepared them in advance, but you have a recording that will illustrate that. Alexander Robb, who was a singer in
Yes.
Aberdeenshire that Gavin Gregg visited a lot, got a lot of good stuff from, had this version that starts off, there was a nicht and a lady bricht set trysts among the broom, which is very similar to the Sir Walter Scott's opening. But then it has this rather odd chorus, Letherum thee, thou and ah. And there's another fragment in Bronson that has that same chorus. I looked at the Mudcat discussion about this ballad, and the late Malcolm Douglas, who was a very good scholar himself, had gone to the source material, Gregg's manuscripts, and he reckoned that was actually a different ballad, something called Jock Sheep, which we know as the Baffled Knight, and that
Oh, yeah.
those had sort of migrated in from somewhere else, but the recording that you have got from the Kister Riches site has a fella singing that chorus with something that is definitely the Broomfield Hill and not Jock Sheep. So I do think there must have been actually some overlap between them. Generally, the Scottish tradition of the ballad isn't that extensive. I mentioned that Bronson doesn't include the stuff from James Madison Carpenter, but he did find it 4 times in Scotland, including once from Belle Duncan, who was his most prolific source, and some people believe that she was the greatest ballad singer of all time, and not Anna Gordon Brown or the various other candidates. Of course, Madison Carpenter made these really rough dictaphone recordings of his singers, so it's difficult to gather from that how good a singer Belle Duncan actually was, but she did sing very full versions of ballads and often to quite interesting tunes. Her version of A Wager doesn't look like the same kind of tune as we find in England, but it's the usual kind of stuff about the nut walking round 9 times. There's quite an interesting formula about where she finds her true love sleeping by the Merry Green Broom, and it says, with a siller bells by the bonny old oak, and the broomstick lay under his feet. Which the broomstick, is that just a branch of the broom? It wouldn't be the old witch woman had sort of parked a broomstick there as part of the spell, surely. But there is a bit of a
Well,
hint there that
yes.
there's already been a little bit of magic going on, and maybe it's not anything that she has done, but maybe it's simply the plant life of the Bonnie Green Broom area has kind of conspired to send him to sleep. This might be total nonsense out of my imagination, but I did think that was quite a powerful line there about the bonny old oak and looking over him. It was the forest of Fangorn in Tolkien, I was imagining. So Bell Duncan had
Yes.
the advice from the manservant to sleep more in the night and stay awake during the day. But then, there's a great variation on the formula about the death threat. He said, "Gin I'd been awake, I wouldn't have cared the very next day." I'm sorry about this, I can't do an Aberdeenshire accent. "I wouldn't have cared though the wild bears had torn her down." So it wasn't the wild birds, it was the wild bears in this one. Again, which is the
Right.
corruption of which? They probably have to be coming from the same source. And then there's this rather nice verse that you find in a couple of these Scottish versions from Carpenter. Basically, she went to the broom greeting and came back laughing. So those are quite interesting, and if I had more time, I'd have looked in more detail at those and tried to master the tunes. But we'll leave that to your listeners to explore that further, to go and listen to those dictaphone recordings. Carpenter also
Indeed.
found a few in England. He found one in Berkshire to a tune that looks to me a little bit like that Somerset one I attempted to sing. Again, an interesting last stanza in this one from Berkshire. She says at the end, "See what a false-hearted young man I've been courting. I think his heart's as hard as any stone," which is familiar phrases, those. But then she goes on, "For here he would have murdered me, and here he could have buried me, and had danced upon my grave where I was born," which is quite odd for a few reasons. It doesn't begin to scan for a start, and danced upon my
Yeah.
grave where I was born. People aren't usually born in their grave. It's kind of usually at the other end of life that happens.
But isn't born, could born in that case be a different spelling and mean like where they were laid, where you bore someone there to lay them? I'm clutching at
Yeah,
straws here.
yeah, good thinking. Good thinking, Batman. I mean, it's actually spelt born without the E in the transcript, but that would make a lot more
Okay.
sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I've just found a version in Bronson. Number 21, if you've got it, the Bonnie Green
Oh,
Woods,
yeah.
sung by Anne Hiles, a servant girl in Lindsay, Lincolnshire.
Yep.
And I'll just read a couple of verses out of this. "A gentleman to a young lady said, I'll bet you 500 to 1 that a maid you go down to yon bonny greenwood side, but a maid you'll not return back again. I'll bet you the same," the young lady said, "and the money I'll freely lay down, that a maid I'll go to yon bonny green woods, and a maid I'll return back again." But stanza 3, however, "Then she mixed him a glass of something so strong, he thought it had been some wine, and when he got down to yon bonny green woods, the sleep it came into his mind." And
Ah,
that explains all the sleep. That
yeah.
explains the
Good spot. I missed that one, Matt. But that also explains why
she
Bert Lloyd was saying she either magics him or she drugs him. That's the drugs.
yeah. She mixed him a glass of something so
Hmm.
strong he thought it had been some wine, and when he got down to yon bonny greenwoods, the sleep it came into his mind.
Yeah.
That's really good. I like that. And then the rest of that one, what have we got? We've got when she got down to yon bonny greenwood, signed her lover lay fast asleep, with his hair and his hounds in silk and satin gowns, and his ribbons hang down his feet. So his pets are all sort of dolled up to the nines
Yes.
in silk and satin gowns. He's a very rich man if his dogs have got pajamas. That's quite an impressive
Well,
thing.
I see people walking dogs around Glossop with little coats on, although not silk and satin gowns, I must admit.
No, and then I think it's a bonny greyhound is
Mm.
mentioned later on. So it's normally steeds and gay goshawks, but not a greyhound.
Yeah,
So that's an interesting specificity there. Greyhound,
yeah.
and it's all twice, three times she walked around the crown of his head, and twice round the soles of his feet, and three times kissed his cherry cheeks. So I wonder where this version has come from. Like earlier than this servant girl from Lincolnshire,
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, those small detail differences, I think that's where we are in the business of the folk process and the mishearings or the forgettings. It's one of the things I find quite interesting, and I have got an example of that, which I can actually quote from that very version. It's how at some point, as you say, we don't know quite what the history and provenance is of any individual version, but that the story gets retold in a slightly different way, but they still make sense out of it. So I just wanted to use as an example of that the version about the part of the story where he's threatening her with the birds feasting on her flesh or blood. So the one you've just mentioned, the Anne Hiles one, has its final stanza: "If I had only had her fast in my arms, and I could but have my will, all the birds in the wood should drink of her blood until they had all had their fill." Now that's quite a standard formulation. You'll find that in a lot of the versions where the rhyme is between "have my will" and "the birds had had their fill." But then one of the other versions that Madison Carpenter collected in England, listen to how it's kind of the same verse, but it's not quite. "If I'd have been awake and my true love had been here, and I could have had my own way instead of had my own will." Okay, so you're kind of thinking, okay, how are they going to resolve this rhyme? And then it goes, "All the pretty birds in the bonny blooming fields should have feasted on her body for their prey." So they've finessed that rhyme
Ah,
quite neatly there.
that's very good. And I just noticed stanza seven of this Bonnie Green Woods one, which I'm rather taken with actually. Maybe I'll have a go at a version of this sometime. Where we got this is the our lead man waking up after the maiden has been and gone, and it's the line: "When he wakened out of his sleep, so well awakened was he." So he obviously had a very good sleep. "He turned his face towards yon bonny broom and wept most bitterly."
Yeah.
So he's very sad about, rather than angry, he's
Yes.
quite sad. So anyway, there's lots of information there, and then the melody for that one, bum bum ba da 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 dum. So this goes, "A gentleman to a lady said, I'll bet you 500 to 1 that a maid you go down to yon." I lost my pace. "That a maid you go down to yon bonny greenwood side, but a maid you'll not return back again." But yeah, so that's got bits of melody and bits of other
Yeah,
ones,
that
and
sounds very familiar, actually, that melody. I can't place it for the moment, but indeed. Um,
the notes that was it says Miss Broadwood compares this with, so maybe this was a Lucy Broadwood collected version. Compared it with Sussex versions of The Bailiff's Daughter and Sweet William's Ghost and The Collier Laddie and Seeds of Love as well. So there's all sorts of links there, melodically
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, they often quote the Bailiff's Daughter as being a particular tune type. I mean, yeah, I heard bits of the Greenland whale fishery and what you just sang, but there's something else in there as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, well, I was going to say we're moving on from Bronson, but actually I'm not moving on from Bronson because there are a couple of versions in there that are quite interesting. Because one of the things I noticed about this song, and I'm not the first to notice it, Mike Yates noticed it as well, is that it was popular amongst gypsies, English gypsies, and they have a tune that is really quite constant. The two in Bronson are, one is from, there's a collector called Alice Gillington, who's not one of the ones we hear a lot about, but she was she collected songs from gypsies in Hampshire, and she included this one in her book, Songs of the Open Road. She was an interesting character. Again, when you start to dig a bit deeper, she actually went on the road in a caravan and with her brother in a second caravan when they were in their 40s. And she was also a very strong campaigner for the rights of travelling people. So she has this version called the Bonnie Bushy Broom that's listed in Bronson. And then Bronson also has one that Cecil Sharp collected from Priscilla Cooper, who was in Devon in 1907. She, again, was one of several travellers, or mostly English gypsies, that Sharp collected from. And she is the subject of this famous story from his autobiography. He did actually do some collecting with a phonograph, although very little. He trusted more to pen and paper. But he was taking down songs from this Priscilla Cooper in her caravan with the phonograph when, according to Maud Carpelle's biography, she stopped singing and turned deathly white, announced that she heard her husband approaching, and as he was of a jealous disposition, she was afraid that he would kill Mr. Sharp. Sharp did not want to be killed. There's a wonderful understatement there. And there was nothing for it to present a bold face. Opening the caravan door, he shouted to the man, "A happy Christmas to you. Stop a moment and listen. I've got your wife's voice in a box." The man was so amazed and delighted that he forgot to kill him, and instead they became great friends. Now, this is Maud Carpelle's, I'm sure, highly romanticised version of Cecil Sharp's encounter with this travelling family. But I thought I'd mention it anyway because it's quite a colourful tale. There's also versions. I think there are 3 different recordings of Queen Caroline Hughes, the famous gypsy matriarch that Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger visited and recorded. MacColl described her in the notes. I mean, it's a brilliant piece of collection. He's got all the context and the singer's own comments about the songs. But he wrote about Queen Caroline Hughes. She was the oldest woman in her community and grandmother to more than half the children on the site where these people were camped. But she was also regarded as the singer, capital S, of the group. Although, as far as we could judge, almost everyone else in the community knew the stories and the themes of her songs, but she was the one that was brought out to sing to MacColl and Seeger. She was actually carried out because she'd been injured in a hit-and-run incident a little while before that, and she was recorded a full gypsy funeral with the caravan being burnt and so on. So she was really interesting singer. I mean, she had very, very odd and unusual versions of ballads. She was the one who, in one version of a ballad, instead of the hero mounting on his milk-white steed, he mounted on a milk-white stag, which is, I'm sure, is not what whoever originally wrote that song had meant to put, but it's such a colourful line. So some people would describe Caroline Hughes's versions of ballads as garbled. Sometimes the characters are mixed up. Sometimes a ballad will, like somebody's changed the points on the railway track and it suddenly morphs into a completely different ballad. So the various recordings that Queen Caroline Hughes made are all a bit strange. So one she sang for Peter Kennedy opens with, "Never mind about a wager, a wager." The opening verse is, "Oh, 'tis where are you now, my faithful greyhound dog? That dog as I've been running with before. 'Tis you I have killed, and your blood I'm going to spill, and we'll let these little wild birds have their fill." So in that one, she started off by saying that he's killed his dog and fed it to the birds. But then there's another one where it's clear that it's the young woman who's going to be, the birds will drink her blood. And there's another verse that she puts into one of the 3 versions that she sang. "Straight away to Hawker Bridge's prison they went. That wicked, wicked woman, oh, she did bedo me down. Now I'm suffering here in prison all my time." Where did that come from? Is that from a different version, or did she just put that in herself to try and make sense of it? It's fascinating. Queen Caroline Hughes called the songs the relegends of her community, which is a wonderful word because it's made partly out of legend and partly out of religion. So it just shows how vital these songs were in that gypsy culture. There's apart from the milk white stag, there was another thing I've made a note of here. This is a line from, I think it's Died for Love, her version. Oh, on yonder's hill, there's blind beetles crawl, as blind could be. I wish to God that I'd been one of those before I'd known my love's company. I mean, my God, nobody else has that verse in Died for Love. It's incredible stuff. So I hope that if you can find a clip of Queen Caroline Hughes, maybe start off with that one where he's basically saying, "I'm sorry, Greyhound dog, I've just murdered you," because it makes such a different opening. Then there are two other versions that we'll talk about at the end from the great Viv Legg, wonderful singer who's still very much around, and Jean Orchard from the Orchard family, who's also very much around. And all of those people, and that includes Priscilla Cooper and the version from Alice Gillington and Queen Caroline Hughes, they all have a version that goes something like, let me just find a verse to sing it to, so I'm singing an authentic verse. God, I've got so many different versions typed out here. Okay, this is Jean Orchard's. It goes, the tune is something like, "A wager, a wager, a wager I will bet. I'll bet you 50 guineas 1-to-1 that you can't go down to that red rosy bush and return the same way home again." That's a travesty.
That's very reminiscent of a lot of Gypsy Traveller sort of melodies.
Yeah.
I recognise bits of that from other songs.
So all of those different singers sang the Broomfield Wager more or less to that tune, and you're right that you will come across that tune elsewhere in that culture. So that was the what I wanted to say about the Gypsy tradition of that. I'll just say a little bit, because there's not, in this case, many of them, but the American versions, which, as you say, you won't find them in Bronson. You have to go to the Roud Index and track down various old books, which I'm afraid I haven't got the details of in front of me. But there's an interesting one from Mrs. Samuel Harmon of Tennessee, and we came across the Harmons in the Wild Boar, Bangerman the Boar, that I was commenting on a little while ago. This was the famous Hicks Harmon singing family. And at least some scholars have speculated that they got a lot of their stuff from their ancestors from England. I don't know whether that's true in the case of this. The Mrs. Harmon's version is quite similar to many of the English ones. There's no actual amount specified, but there is a wager. And she does put broom blossom at his head and feet, but who does he tell to wake him up in advance so that he will win the bet? His parrot. So somewhere along the line, someone knows a version of The Outlandish Night, or possibly Young Hunting, where there's a talking parrot, and that has got substituted for the talking goshawk that's in the old versions. And he tells the parrot off for not waking him, and it replies, "All the song that I could sing, all the notes that I would ring, would not have wakened you." And then it's got this Tennessee version. It's got the business about the birds feasting on her blood at the end. There's another one from West Virginia, which again is pretty familiar stuff. It's from a fella called Carey Woofter, who was known for sort of tampering with his ballads. In his version, he offers his wager to anyone who happens to be listening, and a passing 16-year-old girl says, "Yeah, okay, I'll take you on, mate," and the usual narrative unfolds. But then there's a line, "When he awoke from out of his sleep, a fearsome man was he," and that kind of sounds like somebody who's been dolling it up from their knowledge of old ballads to me. So before we come to the end of this and talk a little bit about the recordings, to me, the big question is that we have the broadside, and often we think about, with many of these songs that had their versions in early broadsides, that is, scholars anyway, believe nowadays that is often the original. But with this one, we have a broadside, but the features that are common to so many of the songs, which is walking around 9 times and then the business about I would have had my will and the birds would have had their fill, they're not there in the broadside, but yet they are known in England. Many, many versions, they're known in Scotland, and even those American versions have them. So, how did they get spread around? It's asking a lot of oral transmission for those really quite distinct formulae to be transmitted so far and so wide. So part of me thinks, I wonder if there's a broadside somewhere that nobody's found yet. But I did ask David Atkinson, who knows far more about broadsides than most people and has been an expert for you in the past. And he said, yeah, but I think we'd have found it if there had been one. So who
Yeah,
knows?
sure.
That's the big mystery to me about the Broomfield Hill is where did that stuff come from?
Indeed. And yeah, we have been talking for quite a while now, but I just before we go on to the recommended listening, I do want to just briefly talk a bit more about the Gordon Hall one because that's my
Of
sort of
course.
field there, or my Broomfield Hill. So as we were going through the versions in Child, I noticed that so much of the first half of Gordon Hall's version is almost verbatim, albeit with translated into modern English, version A from Child.
Right.
So version A from Child starts off with "There was a knight and lady bride of true tryst at the broom," and it doesn't mention the wager at all, does
No,
it? That
that's the
one.
Walter
That's what
Scott
we said.
one.
That's right. And so Gordon's one starts with the wager, and you get two verses. One from his point of view saying, saying him saying to her, "I'll wager you," and her response saying, "I'll wager back, your 100 bright nobles to your 10 nobles." I did look this up while we were chatting. A noble is an English coin, a gold English coin introduced during the second coinage of King Edward III.
Wow. Yeah.
So the coin, a noble was 6 shillings and 8 pence.
R-
That was a noble.
Right. So that's interesting because that was a third of an old pound, wasn't it? Well, you're probably too young to remember, but 6 and 8 was a third of 20 shillings.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, anyway, that's a whole other area, but nevertheless, that's the noble thing come from. And then we get and then Gordon launches into the beginning of Child A.
Mm.
There was a knight and lady so bright had a true tryst at the broom, and he's then slightly paraphrased a bit. The one girl ride early on the May morning, and the other in the afternoon. And then the maiden sat at her mother's bower door, and there she made her moan, saying, "Whether shall I go to the bonny Broomfield Hill, or shall I bide me at home?" And she says, "Yeah, for if I should go to the bonny Broomfield Hill, then my maidenhead is gone. But if I bade me by my mother's bower door, then my true love will call me forsworn."
Oh, yes, forsworn. That's right.
And then it's the witch woman, and the witch woman tells her to, if you go to the up spake a witch woman, or from a lofty room. This is pretty much what's in Child A. Go to the bonny Broomfield Hill, and you will find your lover asleep. He will have a coarsely silver belt around his neck, and its brother around his feet.
God.
So, so all these weird little bits. But then, yeah, in Child, it's silver belt around his head and a broom cow at his feet. I'm not sure what a broom cow is.
Yes, I didn't know that either. I did see that.
So Gordon changed it to broom, and she says, yeah, and this is Gordon's one. And she says, "Take the blossom from the green broom and lay it on his white collarbone, and place the twigs at his feet, and take the ring from off your soft white hand, place it at his right thumb, and this will be a token to your true love when he wakes. He will know you have been at his command." And then it carries on. I'm sort of skipping through this now, but the knight, he's a knight in this one as well. He goes to the Broomfield Hill. He's quite weary. As he became quite weary, he set himself down to rest and fell asleep. So he's just quite very tired, basically, in
Yeah.
that one. And she comes to the broom and does all the things she was told to do. And then he wakes up to find that she's come and gone. And he gets annoyed at his milk white steed, and at his gay goshawk, and at his edel painted page. And the page says, if you lay still when you lay in bed at night, you will not sleep through the day. And then it ends with her saying, well, she then sings, one wager, I did lay unto thee. Her saying, ha, I won. And then he does the, if I had been awake when I was fast asleep, you would have killed, etc. And then and then she sings the, your hard-hearted young man, your heart must be hard as any stone, etc.
Yeah.
And it ends with her singing, one wager, I did lay unto thee, and I did go back and made him once and again. So it's an extremely complete version, and the melody I think is fascinating. It's a relatively straightforward melody that I've not come across anywhere else in Broomfield Hills, but the structure, Gordon's done this fantastic chapter-like structure. He's got essentially it's an A-B tune, except both parts are the same, but the A part does not resolve.
Mm-hmm.
So it leads into the B. So it goes one one wager, I will lay unto thee 100 bright nobles to your 10, that you will ne'er be followed to the bonny Broomfield hill, for a maiden you ne'er shall return. One wager, I will lay unto thee your 100 bright nobles to my 10, that I will go a maiden to the bonny Broomfield hill, and will come back a maiden once again.
Nice tune.
So it's A-B, but it's the unresolved and resolve are the differences.
Yeah.
And so what he does with this is that's an A-B stanza. Then there's another A-B stanza, which is the knight and lady so bright had a true tryst going into the mother's bower door thing. It's A-B. And then we get 5 stanzas just with the A melody. So we get 5 stanzas that never resolve.
Right.
So he just launches as if it's one long stanza for 5
Amazing.
stanzas, essentially. But the end of the 5th one, it goes into the B, and the B stanza there is back to one wager, I will lay unto thee again, which is her repeating her side of the bet after the witch has told her what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get 12 more A stanzas that never resolve. It's glorious.
Gosh, yeah.
And this is the main plot of the song. The knight goes to the Broomfield Hill, lies down, sleeps. She comes and does all the things to him. He wakes up, finds she's gone, gets annoyed with the steed, the goshawk, and the page, and ends. And the 12th A tune stanza, which is the end of the page one about you would not sleep through the day, does not resolve and goes back into the B melody, which is her singing one wager, I did lay unto thee. And so he's got this kind of long chapter. He's used the B stanzas in terms of the melody that resolve to end kind of chapters of the story. And then he does, if I had been awake when I was fast asleep, through to the small birds and you hard-hearted young man, is all 3 more A tune stanzas, and it ends with a B stanza tune, which is her singing one wager again, and her repeating the fact that she won the wager. And so he's used the A and B stanzas to indicate kind of the flow of the story and where there's effectively a chapter break or an intermission, which I find so fascinating, and I'm sure no one except me and you will find that the least bit interesting, but I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a one-off and very, very skillful in what he's doing.
Yeah. And I noticed that, the first half of his is most of Child A, and I think there's some of Child B, the B version, or maybe it's the C version in his second half. So he's obviously gone back to Child and made a kind of composite, complete version.
Yeah.
Anyway, which I think is wonderful. And I may learn it again more. I did learn it once and never got to sing it out loud. Maybe I will learn it again and bore the pants off some people. That's Anyway, we've talked for quite a while about this. Let's attempt, because I haven't edited this yet, but we're currently at 1 hour 17, so on the timer. So let's do more of a whistle-stop tour through some recommended listening.
Yeah, certainly. Well, you've already talked about Golden Hall. To me, the one I know best of this is Cyril Poacher singing in the famous Blackshall ship down there in Suffolk. And the best version of that to listen to, I think, is on a CD called The Barley Mow. although it's been,
Oh, that's one of the later Voice of the People
yeah,
collection,
that's
isn't it?
right.
It's
And that,
one of the unnumbered. It's essentially between volumes 21 to 30, but they're not numbered as
yeah.
such. Yeah,
And that was recorded by, I think, by Peter Kennedy. Was it that the 50s? I haven't got the date in front of me.
I think so.
But
Yes.
it's a famous for it's famous as the hold the wheel version because what happens when Cyril Poacher sang that song in the pub was that he would repeat the last couple of lines effectively as a chorus so everybody could join in, and then everybody else in the pub, although not Cyril Poacher himself, would sing hold the wheel. So, I mean, you're going to play it anyway, so I don't need to try and reproduce it. But there are various theories about what "hold the wheel" meant. The one in the musical traditions notes on Cyril Poacher thinks it was. They think it was a visiting yachtsman who Cyril Poacher tried to explain what the song was about, and this outsider, this greenhorn, misheard the phrase "he had his way with her" as hold the wheel, which to me doesn't sound terribly likely. I must admit, I prefer the idea that the yachtsman had kind of run aground on the beach and somebody had said to him, well, you ought to hold the wheel next time, mate. But who knows? It has nothing to do with the ballad narrative at all, but it was obviously something that was expected in that pub that they would all sing Hold the Wheel at the end of the chorus of every verse. And it's a great recording because you can hear the MC of the night, who was a fellow called Wickets Richardson.
Order, please.
Yes, calling for order, and he had a crib board that he used to bang on the pub table to get order. So that is, I've used that recording in just about every ballad workshop I've ever given, because people have all these ideas about how strange and mysterious and weird the English folk tradition is, and in some ways it is. It is quite a strange ballad, but then you have to remind them that actually it could be just people getting drunk and having fun, as well as all the occultness
Too
and the strangeness and so on. So
too
there is
true. Too
also
true.
a recording of Cyril Poacher. I know it's on the Musical Traditions CD. Of him singing it at home. It was recorded by Jeanette Dunn in 1974. He's much lower in pitch because, of course, he's not having to make himself heard above a raucous pub atmosphere. It's slower. It's much more reflective. He doesn't sing the chorus. There's no hold the wheel. The collector said that by 1974 he'd gone back to the old way of singing it without the chorus. But I just think, well, would he have sung a chorus? Because he wasn't actually in the pub and there was nobody there to join in. So
Indeed.
it's a fairly standard version. It's the 9 times around his head. If I'd have been awake, all of that business. But then there's a slightly weird verse at the end, where instead of the horse and the hound and the manservant making excuses for not waking him up, it's actually the woman who is making the excuse. And she says, 9 times with my bell I did ring master, 9 times with my whip I did snap. So again, there's a bit of folk processing gone on there. So that was Cyril Poacher, strongly recommended. Another wonderful version from East Anglia is Walter Pardon's version, which actually doesn't have any death threats and does start off, it's of a young squire. But my first thought was, I wonder if he's singing the broadside text. But no, he isn't. He's singing all the 9 times round his head business. It's clearly to the same kind of tune as Cyril Poacher sang, where if Cyril Poacher sang, a wager, I'll lay you 5,000 to your one, that a maiden I'll go to that merry Broomfield, and a maiden I'm sure I will return. Hold the wheel. We're not singing Hold the Wheel. Whereas Walter Pardon sings a very odd first line, but then the rest of it is pretty much the same as Cyril Poacher's, except that it's in triple time, not duple. He sang, it's of a young squire who rode out one day, by chance his lady love did meet. 'Twas down in the lane that led to Broomfield Hill, with these words his lady he did greet. So you can tell that is the same tune, really, except for that weird first line with a flat note in it. I love
Yeah.
that one. Pop Maynard's is great too. That was recorded again by Peter Kennedy in 1956. And although it doesn't have that detail on the recording, it was also clearly recorded in a pub. And I mean, it's a standard um, tactic of the pub singer. He, like Cyril Poacher in The Ship, repeats the last two lines of the verse to serve as a refrain. Again, pretty much a standard version. It's Pop Maynard, so of course he's singing it really quite slowly and deliberately. But I do like that version. And then we can add to that a Viv Legg and Jean Orchard, Queen Caroline Hughes, I've already talked about. I don't need to talk about them again.
Yeah.
Viv Legg and Jean Orchard are both on CDs on the Veteran label, both singing to that tune that I attempted to reproduce before. The other one I wanted to mention was George Dunn, the singer from the West Midlands, and I think if one of your revival recordings that you highlight later on is Chris Coe. She got her version from the recording of George Dunn, and that was a wager with you, my pretty maid. Here's £500 to your 10. That a maid you shall go to yon merry green broom, but a maid in you shall not return. So that's another lovely version too. And I think, because as you say, we have talked for quite a long time already, I'm going to let you talk about not Gordon Hall again. I think we've done him, but you had at least one other traditional recording you wanted to talk about, and then we're kind of more or less done.
I think so. Yeah, there was just one more that links back to a version in Bronson, a Scots version in Bronson that's in Bronson, but then I found it listed in the when I went through the Roud index for this song and um, filtered it down by audio recordings. There was a mention of a Scotsman called Norman McCaig. Keeps saying as if it's McCraig, but there's no R in McCaig. And so it's on the Kister Riches website, the fantastic Scots archive, recorded in October of 1952 by William Montgomery. And yeah, that one links back to that Scots one in Child with that refrain.
Well, it's the one in Bronson with the
leather.
Leatherham chorus, isn't it?
That's right. Leatherham, thee, thou, and our Madam, I were you. Seal, o me, abraki, fair maiden, I'm for you. And it appeared that so what they've said is there's a recording there. I'll probably play a bit of it in a minute. And text is transcribed in the School of Scottish Studies, 10 verses with the refrain after each. The tune used here is, however, from Jock Sheep, a variant of the Baffled Knight, Blow with the Morning Dew, which we mentioned, and that's episode 1 of season 2 of this podcast. The tune appears in Greg and Keith, Last Leaves of Traditional Ballads, wrongly attributed to the Broomfield Hill by Gavin Gregg. So
that sounds to me like that singer has put that together deliberately.
Quite possibly, then, maybe.
And it's interesting also that Ian McCall sang a version that sounded very much like that, which he claimed to have got from his father, but there has been speculation that... it was Malcolm Douglas again who said something along the lines of, it's interesting how the ballads that Ian McCall got from his father are so much fuller and more interesting than basically anybody else's, which is quite similar to the Burt Lloyd story as well. So we'll leave that there to speculate about.
Yeah, Norman McCaig, born 1910, died 1996 from Midlothian, Edinburgh. And that's all there is actually a biography. And it's no search that the link isn't working. But somewhere definitely is a biography of him. So it'd be interesting to find out maybe whether that was something he put together or he got it from someone who put it together. But we don't know. Immediately, we don't know. But anyway, this has been rather exhaustive. So I think
we've done it. I think we've put it to bed.
We have, yes, and this has been, as far as I'm concerned, most excellent, and always a pleasure to have you on the pod, as we call it, Brian.
Pod, yeah,
and yes, I don't think we'll see you for a little while more. This is your only appearance in this season, and I don't think you're in the next season, but we'll definitely see you I won't say what the song is, but we'll definitely have you back season 6, episode 1, which will be the first episode of next year. We'll definitely have you then. Otherwise, yeah, your time and effort and knowledge are very much appreciated in this mad endeavor of mine.
Yeah, well, as you know, I love doing it, so well done, Matt.
Yeah. Great. Well, yeah, and we'll see you again in the future, I'm sure. For the meantime, Brian Peters, thank you very much.
Cheerio, Matt. Goodbye.
A huge thanks to Brian Peters for providing us with the history of the Broomfield wager. As ever, at this, the halfway point in the episode, we're going to take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of the song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now is the Broomfield wager from Cyril Poacher, complete with Hold the Wheel chorus, and then Broomfield Hill from the singing of Walter Pardon, Viv Legg, George Dunn, Carolyn Hughes and Gordon Hall.
Ladies and gentlemen, respected chair, my splendid corner on premise to see feet of life with a small ditty.
Oh wager, I'll lay you 5,000 C01. That a maiden I'll go till at Mary Broomfield, and a maiden I'm sure I will return.
Oh, the will.
That a maiden I'll go till at Mary Broomfield, and a maiden I'm sure I will return. Oh, the will.
It's of a young squire who rode out one day. By chance his lady love did meet. 'Twas down in the lane that led to Broomfield Hill. With these words his lady he did greet. A wager with you, pretty maid. My £100 to your 10, that a maid you shall go into yonder green broom, but a maid you shall never return.
A wager, a wager, a wager it shall be. I will bet you 20 guineas to your pound, that I will go to that bonny greenwood tree, and a maiden return back safe at home. But when she got there to that bonny greenwood tree, she found her lover sleeping on the ground. 9 times she walked round the soles of his feet, and 3 times she kissed his red and rosy cheeks. 3 times she kissed his red and rosy cheeks, as he lay a-sleeping on the ground.
A wager with you, my pretty maid. Here's £500 to your 10. That a maid you shall go to yon merry green broom, but a maid you shall not return. A wager with you, kind sir, with your £500 to my 10. That I will go to yon merry green broom, and a maid I will boldly return.
Oh, 'tis where are you now, my faithful ground dog? That dog as I've been running wi' before. 'Tis you I have killed, and your blood I'm going to spill, and we'll let these little well birds have their fill. Oh, for I laid myself in the bonny bunch of blue. I were listening to what my true love had to say. And stead as being asleep, oh, I should have been awake. I would have known the deeds that false young man have done.
One wager, I will lay unto thee. 100 bright nobles to your 10, that you will ne'er me follow to the bonny Broomfield hill. For a maiden you never shall return. One wager, I will lay unto thee. Your 100 bright nobles to my 10, that I will go a maiden to the bonny Broomfield hill, and will come back a maiden once again.
And you can find the links to all those tracks and the albums from which they came in the show notes. I just want to take a second to tell you all about the Patreon, which I'm sure you know about already, but I'll tell you again. Over on the Patreon side for In the Roud, we cover songs from much further on in the Roud Index and other subjects too. Subject of song collectors, singers, regions of song collecting, all that sort of thing. All for £5 or £10 per month to receive regular bonus content. And we are currently in the middle of a 3-episode mini-season of Singer's Choice with special guest Jess Arrowsmith, and we're covering 3 songs, all chosen by her. Last week we had an episode on Roud 513, that's the song Poor Old Horse, and the history was provided by Steve Gardam. There's no episode this week, but next week, on the 26th of June, we'll be back with Jess's second song choice, Roud 816, A Blacksmith Courted Me, with history provided by Vic Gammon. Sign up to hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. On to the second half of the episode. I spoke with singer, cellist and fiddle player Rachael McShane, and we chatted about her history with folk music and her version of The Broomfield Wager. Well, hello, and a big In the Roud welcome to Rachael McShane. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing? How's things?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm all good. Busy. I'm just getting ready for some festivals at the weekend, down to Otley Folk Festival. No, Otley Music Festival, I should say, and then Gower Folk Festival, which we've just discovered we're going to miss each other by like 2 hours or something.
That's right. I'll be at Gower Folk Festival on Saturday and Sunday, but Saturday midday till about Sunday 1:30 p.m, and then you're performing in the evening on the Sunday. So
yeah,
we discovered that by the time you're on stage sound checking, I will be arriving home, having driven back to Sheffield from the Gower. So
yeah, we'll perhaps pass you on the motorway on the way down.
Yeah, we'll accidentally rendezvous at not Cheveley services, whichever A services on the route. You know, I can't remember which one. How many services there are? Not Cheveley, that's the M4. I'm sure we'll both have a nice time at Gower, even though we won't see each other.
Yeah, looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I did Gower back in 2017, I think, with the Dovetail Trio, and it was on a different site then. It was a marquee, but it was in a huge back garden of a pub. It was quite a huge pub and a sort of big site thing, but it was one marquee in like this big field. Whereas now it's in like a castle, or the grounds of a castle overlooking a river or something.
Yeah, I've done it before. I think it must have been like 2004, and I can't remember.
Oh right, wow.
About it.
Yeah.
Like it was rural.
Yes.
And beyond that, I can't really remember.
It doesn't really narrow it down for Wales, I think.
No.
Apologies to any Welsh people listening that have just described your entire place as rural. Yeah, anyway, so I'm sure I'll have a great time there. So we've got the Broomfield wager today. Before we get into your side of things with this song, I know you've already done this for a few people on the podcast because you've already been on this is your first time on the podcast proper, but you have been on the Patreon before. You came on and did 3 songs in a Singer's Choice mini-season for us over on the Patreon. And
some good higher numbers that you might not get to for a while.
For a while, yes. There's one of them I think I won't get to ever because it was in the 3000s. But there was a 339 and a 379, I think. Green Broom and Plumen Laddies, or it might have been the other one. Whatever the other one was, it might have been that one. It was the Gardener, those two, Green Broom and the Gardener, and Plumen Laddies in the 3000s.
Yeah.
So you've already been on, and for those of podcast listeners who are Patreon subscribers, will have heard at least the first or maybe all 3 of those, and they heard the first one, which included you and your history with folk music, but because not everyone on the podcast is subscribed to my Patreon, hint, hint, listeners, you could let's have this again now for the benefit of everyone else. Rachael McShane, give us a bit of Rachael McShane history and your sort of background with folk music and your sort of musical upbringing and all that sort of.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I grew up in quite a musical household. I suppose got taken along to festivals. We were just mentioning Whitby before we started recording, Whitby Folk Festival, and that was like the festival that we went to every year when I was a kid. So kind of absorbed in all that kind of side of things. My dad played for Cayleys and used to play for the Irish Dancing in Barnsley, where I grew up. So I ended up kind of going along that route, and I guess after a while of learning all the dancing and wanted to start taking up playing an instrument and things, and found that all these tunes already existed in my head, which was amazing. So kind of worked from there, and then kind of fast forward a little while, I ended up in the first cohort at the Newcastle University folk degree when that first started up back in 2001. So quite a few of us that were in that year, the very first year of it, ended up kind of still around on the scene playing folk music and things. I did quite a lot more singing while I was at uni, and I think that's how I ended up kind of falling in love with a lot of folk traditional songs and things. And then ended up joining Bellowhead and been kind of playing with those guys. And I have my own band as well, Rachael McShane and the Cartographers, with Ian Stevenson, who was in that first year at Newcastle as well with me, who I'd actually known since I was a kid, and Julian Sutton, who's an amazing box player. So
very good backing band too. I saw you guys in Penistone not too long ago on your tour.
Yeah, where I grew up in Penistone. That was a lovely little gig, actually.
Yeah, it was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, really nice.
And drinks afterwards in the dark, I seem to remember. There was no lights in the room.
Yeah. I think that was self-inflicted, wasn't it? It was either very, very, very bright.
We had to move into one of the rooms in the hotel, one of the sort of lounge rooms, and there were no dimmer switches. It was just like on-off lights. So we turned all that off and used our iPhone lights to sort of to mood music, mood lighting, which was very strange.
Yeah, it's got to be done.
It was a struggle trying to find out which phone was mine when I left at the end. Anyway, we're off topic here, but yeah. So because I've known about you through basically, I think my knowledge of you started with Bellowhead. I think.
Yeah.
Just because when Bellowhead started, I was 14, 15, and I was absolutely obsessed, and as quite a lot of people were and still are. And yeah,
did you say you were there at like some of the very early gigs?
I think I was at the third one, Sidmouth Folk Week 2004. I think I was there at that one. Memory of that.
Yeah.
And then and then I sort of I definitely bought your first solo album, on which Broomfield Wager is on.
Yes.
I bought that when it came out because I remember it coming out, and you didn't do a, because I know. Did you ever get the Bellowhead support tour? Because when Benji Kirkpatrick's solo album came out, he did the support for Bellowhead, and so did Sam Sweeney. Did you get a Bellowhead support when?
No.
Sorry to bring up something that might be sort of bad. Did you?
No,
No, you didn't do it.
No, never did it. I don't really know why. I think maybe I didn't want to.
Oh well, it's a lot of work, I suppose. You're there
Yeah.
on stage for the entire night.
Yeah, I know, like not the two that we've just done, but the one before, Sam did the support with his band, and it was great, and I think he enjoyed doing it, but it's exhausting doing a gig and then straight on to do another quite tiring, high energy gig. So,
Yeah, exactly.
and do that every night for 3
I
weeks.
did wonder about that because the tour. This is we're getting into sort of Bellowhead nerd stuff now, but the tour that Bellowhead did in 2008, where Saul Rose depped for John Spires,
Oh yeah,
that's the tour where Benji Kirkpatrick did the support solo because he had the album Boomerang coming out.
right,
And I
yeah,
remember thinking, he's now got to go off stage and come back on and jump around for an hour and a half.
yeah.
And
Hardcore that.
yeah, and so consequently, I know your relationship with this song is through Bellowhead and solo on that first album, No Man's Fall, but they are different versions.
They are.
So at least they're that to talk about. So does actually I think because your solo album came out before you did this with Bellowhead, I think.
Yeah.
And so where does Broomfield Hill or Broomfield Wager sort of start for you in your history? Was it a song you were aware of already, or was this one of your I found the words in the bottom of the drawer sort of things?
I think it probably ended up in the drawer. For those people that haven't heard the other podcast that I do, I'm just like a little bit of a magpie when it comes to songs. But what I'm not very good at is remembering where I got those things from or noting it down. So I quite often just, I'll collect things and then I'll just bob them away and then come back to them. It's a nice little surprise to go, ooh, that'd be a good song to do. I suppose that's kind of, there's more stuff kind of knocking around on the internet now than there was like back in the early 2000s, I guess. So it's a bit easier to kind of trace where you might have found things from. But I think that I started singing this one at uni a little bit.
Right.
Which maybe means that it came to me via Sandra Kerr.
Quite possibly, yeah. She was everyone's favourite singing teacher on the degree. I had her for a year. My second year of uni, she was my singing teacher.
Yeah.
Well.
So yeah, it could have come via Sandra, I think. But yeah, when I came to do this, the album No Man's Fool, just brought it to the band. And I just really love the song. I think it's there's kind of a lot going on in it. Well, as Brian has been through.
Yes, it's a not necessarily an epic sort of saga, although it's a relatively contained saga.
Yeah.
As opposed to next week's song, which is Tam Lin, if anyone wants to know. That's an epic saga.
It sure is. Yeah. Strap in for that one.
Whereas this one is just a bit of a to and fro of a tryst wager and a bit of supernatural stuff going on in there, depending on which version you have. Does your version have the witch woman?
No, there's no witch woman in mine. I think mine is relatively contained, like 9 verses. Mine, but it's kind of nice to look at some of those other versions, and there's lots of other bits going on. Because you were saying there's a parrot in one of them, isn't there?
Yes, in what Brian said, in one version there was, I can't remember which version it was, but a parrot did turn up. Yes.
Yeah, because there's a parrot in, what song is it that I sing?
Well, the main parrot one is the Outlandish Nights normally.
Yes.
Is that the one? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And normally they're called Polly as well. So there you go.
I'd like a sentient parrot. I think it's nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, not in my version.
We'll have another sentient parrot
Anyway.
in the next season, I think. I think it's next season we're coming to the song Young Hunting, and I'm pretty sure there's a
Yeah.
sentient parrot in that one as well.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Brian Peters is doing something for that one. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so yeah, it's interesting that there's a version of Broomfield out there that has the parrot, but not yours.
No. I think mine is relatively contained. Here's the wager. I bet you this. Bet you won't. She kind of gets there, fast asleep. A bit of I quite like this whole thing of the 3 times thing. I know sometimes you saying it's sometimes like 9 times, isn't it?
Oh yeah, 3. There's one version where it was 3, then 6, then 9 for all the different bits.
Right.
But it's normally 3
Yeah.
times, I think, for most people. Yeah.
Yeah. But I quite like that, the 3 times from the crown of his head and the soles of his feet and all those things.
Yeah.
And then leaving in my version, the ring of gold from her hand, to let him know that she'd been there. And then I just love the bit about, which is in my version, about when he wakes up and then 3 times he called for his horse and his man. The horse he had once bought so dear, saying, "Why didn't you wake me?" I just love that it sounds like that he's asking the horse. I think it's brilliant. In my head, the horse responds, but I'm sure that's not how it's intended.
Yes, indeed. My brain is whirring. I was trying to come up with a joke about naysayers, but it wasn't getting anywhere. Sorry. There's a joke about horses and naysayers. Horses, sentient horses. They're called naysayers. There we go. That's the joke, isn't it? Excellent. Thank you very much. It's not 10 o'clock in the morning. My work is done. I think I'll take the rest of the day off. Naysayers, very good. Well done, me. So yeah, so the horse doesn't respond in your version. There are verses where the horse actually does say, "I did try and wake you, but you wouldn't wake."
Yeah, well, it says 3 times I called to you, master. 3 times did I blow upon my horn. Out of your sleep you would not wake till your lady, your true lover, was gone. But it doesn't actually say who said that. It could be the horse or the man.
Oh, I see. He calls to them both in one verse, does he? So you don't know who's responding.
3 times he called to his horse and his man.
Oh, it's going to be the man then, isn't it? I think if it's not specified.
Yeah.
Whereas other versions do have. He says, because like the Gordon Hall one that I sing, or I did sing once a long time ago. So he calls to his milk white steed first, and then the milk white says, "I stamped with my feet, which made my bright bell to ring. You wouldn't waken." Then he calls to his gay goshawk, and basically the gosling says, "I flapped my wings, but you wouldn't waken." And then he calls to his edel painted page, and why do you not wake me? And the page says,
I love that.
I shook you, but you did not wake. And then that fantastic thing about if you lay still when you lay in bed at night, then you would not sleep through the day. And I think, yeah. So I always thought it was one of the best lines.
What have you been up to?
What have you been up to? If you weren't so busy getting busy during the night, then you wouldn't be tired in the daylight. There's that. So a lesson to us all.
Yeah.
But then if actually, I've just realised that if that is the correct reading of what the page is saying, then that implies that our knight, who's theoretically true love with this woman stuff, he's not been faithful to her because he's been not sleeping through the night, other people. So
maybe so.
So maybe he's not a faithful true lover in that version. So there's all that. Not that that really has any much effect on the story, but it's interesting to consider.
No, I mean he seems like a fairly unpleasant sort. Anyway, my last verse. Anyway, the
does he threaten to kill her?
Had I been awake, yeah. If not the pretty birds in this merry green broom, of her blood they should have had their fill. Whoa. I
know. Yeah, and on a bit of it's striking imagery, this idea of birds drinking of the spilt blood,
It's pretty rancid, isn't it?
But why would the birds? Birds don't drink blood, so it sounds like it's just him trying to be really threatening rather than, because if he did kill her and spill her blood, I don't think the birds would have drunk it.
I don't know.
Unless they were dying of thirst, I suppose, but unless there'd been a drought recently. But
Yeah.
it's it's just
It sounds pretty
it's
dark though,
it's
doesn't it?
very dark. I think it's just the night trying to sound as menacing as possible,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it
it was.
works.
It worked. Yeah.
And is that where yours end? You don't have anything with the maid responding to that about you
No.
hard-hearted young man. How could you say so?
No, absolutely not. No.
Oh well, there we go.
Um, I kind of like it ending that way of just leaving it on that ominous note.
Yeah. And
And then
was that something you edited down, or was this just like I know you said you might have found these words in the drawer? Was this
no,
these are the
this was
words you found, or
yeah.
did you do any kind of editing process on this? Or
Oh, it's a long time ago, Matt. I don't know. Yeah, 2009. I
yeah,
recorded it,
yeah.
which feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, I was in my second year on the folk music degree.
Oh,
Oh, in 2009, I was, as we found out before, we were both living in Newcastle,
yeah.
but our paths never crossed until
No,
and to speak to each other until last year,
yeah, no.
which is quite astonishing.
I know. In a pub in Sheffield.
In a pub in Sheffield, but you were there on tour, so yes, that was. But yeah, so yeah, it's interesting that then your version ends with on the downer with the guy with him threatening rather than a response from the fair maiden who has not lost her maidenhead.
Yeah. I kind of like in a way that she's done what she set out to do. She's gone. She's kind of tricked him in whatever way. She's got out of there. And I quite like the feeling of he's just left in a bit of a
Feeling a bit cross.
yeah.
That happens in the song "Lovely Joan" as well. She, because he suggests that because he wants to rob her or whatever, and she robs him and rides off with his horses, and the song
Yeah.
ends and he's just left stamping around in the field, getting a bit cross.
Yeah.
And I think that's
quite like that.
quite funny. Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, and so does your version start with? Does your version have the wager stuff in it, or is it just there was a night and stuff?
No, I don't have the night bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because as Brian was saying, there are some versions that start with the wager, and some that start with there was a night and Lady So Bright, or whatever. And there are sometimes it was one or the other, but it's
Yeah. He's not described as a knight in my version.
Ooh, okay.
It's just starts with the wager with you, my pretty maid, £500 to your 10. And then her response of wager with you, kind sir, and all of that. Yeah. So yeah, interesting to see that he's in some versions a knight. I hadn't really sort of thought about who he might be in my
apart from
version.
just an awful man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a bit wronging.
indeed. And so the version on the album then with the band at the time.
Yeah.
What's that all about? If you have anything to say about that, I don't mean that in a bad way. What's that all about? I just mean tell us about that if there's anything to say.
Yeah, well, I think at the time I just fancied putting together a band to do some folk songs with some people who were outside of the folk scene, didn't really necessarily know anything about the folk scene, and I just thought that would be quite good fun. So I had my friend James Peacock, who played kind of piano and keyboards. Jonathan Proud, who's my partner now, played bass, and a guy called Adam Sinclair that did all the kind of percussion and drums and things on it. So I think, yeah, a lot of the arrangements are not necessarily that folky, although, I'm singing and playing in my kind of style, but a few different influences in there, which was quite good fun at the time.
Yes, I remember listening to that and thinking, this is a bold swing of an album.
Yeah.
And yeah, it works. I like it. It's good fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed doing it, actually. It was good fun. I think at the time, not a lot of people wanted to book it because it had drums in it.
Yeah.
I think that immediately put people off at the time. But that probably wouldn't be the case now. But
yeah, it's interesting how things change.
yeah, definitely.
attitudes. But yeah, fair enough. And then this also subsequently, I think, became, or a different version came to Bellowhead as well.
Yeah.
It's on the album Hedonism. And I saw this live once. This song with Bellowhead. I could even tell you where it was that I saw you do this live. Bellowhead. If things happened with Bellowhead like once, or like an odd thing happened, I can usually exactly remember where it was. And this was I can't remember what year, although it must have been 2000. Well, it came out on Hedonism. So when did that come out? 2009, 10 or something.
10, I think. So I think it was the year after No Man's Fool.
Yeah,
My album.
and so that must have been 2010 Derby Folk Festival,
Right.
because Bellowhead were on. Me and my old college mate who lives in Derby, we both went to college in Lewis in Sussex. He moved to Derby. I went to Newcastle. I came to see him for the weekend because Bellowhead were on. And we walked into the assembly rooms to find the big sign saying Derby Folk Festival, and suddenly I was confronted by 100 people that I knew, and I didn't know were going to be there because I thought it was a Bellowhead gig and not the Derby Folk Festival. And I remember bumping into John Spires and people, and then I remember you guys performing this, and I thought, this is awesome.
Oh, you've got a much better memory than I have, Matt.
I do retain some pointless things.
Yeah. Me too, but different things, I think.
Yeah. And then the second time you guys did the assembly rooms, I came to see that, but there was a double booking of the big hall, and they moved you guys into the smaller room, which was a bit of a squeeze for the audience and for the band on the stage.
Oh, yeah.
And Hannah and Sam with the support, Hannah James, Sam Sweeney with the support. Anyway, this is just me and my Bellowhead nerdiness.
Bellowhead geeky.
But yeah, so I really love the Bellowhead version of this. Is there anything? I've got some things about it I can say, but is there anything that you can remember about it that might be of interest?
Well, if I'm completely honest, it's a song that we probably did live a little bit, like when the album came out back in 2010.
It's probably that tour, and then maybe it stopped.
Yeah, and then it got dropped, and it had sort of fallen out of my head because I don't feel like we've really played it much. Well,
if there ever is another tour happening, I will formally request.
Get your request in now, yeah.
I'll text John. I'll text John Bowden saying, "Excuse me, I would like to hear Broomfield Hill, A Begging I Will Go, Copsham Fair, and The Rigs of the Times again, please."
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's it. There's plenty of things in the back catalogue. I think that's why, because you end up, I can't remember how many albums we did. You probably know better than I do.
5 studio ones, and then the live one, and then the COVID live one. So.
And then things, you can't fit all of that stuff in a gig, so
no, exactly.
It all gets forgotten. But yeah, it was sort of started with a big sort of epic stringy opening.
Oh, it had like an overture, didn't it? You did like a pastoral sort of overture thing, didn't you? Yeah.
And then John had kind of pinched a little bit of a little Merry Month of May kind of chorusy bit that you put in it.
Oh yes, that's right. Because there's no chorus in any Broomfield Hill. And I remember thinking, oh, there's a chorus in this one.
Yeah.
And so I think he found that in some Robin Hood ballad. I think the general consensus with Robin Hood ballads is that they're all not very interesting. And I think John found that verse. There's 13 months all in one year, as I've heard people say, but the finest month in all the year is the very merry month of May. And it just kind of works as a kind of generic sort of let's sing that every time sort of thing.
Yeah. Works really well. Kind of feels like it fits quite nicely.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that John. This is John Bowden's arrangements. Obviously, he's the person to talk about this. But I spent years thinking I know that melody from somewhere else, and it turns out, having looked on us mainly Norfolk, because he wrote some notes for it when he did it on his Folk Song a Day project, and it's the tune of the Scots folk song Bogey's Bonny Bell, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't realise that earlier because it's obvious to me now.
Yeah, it's funny that though, isn't it?
It's Bogey's Bonny Bell. He just took that melody and put it to the words of Broomfield Hill.
Yeah, but there's so many tunes and songs that you can marry together and you go, they feel like they're meant to be.
Yeah, exactly.
They work really nicely together.
But yeah, that Bellowhead arrangement, it starts off with that kind of pastoral sort of overture thing, and then I remember the first half of the song is quite, in quotes, folky, in a kind of relatively straightforward kind of what you'd expect a folk arrangement to sound like. You just sort of playing it, not the word properly, it doesn't work here, but you're just playing it straight through, and then there's a halfway point when it changes and it goes into a bit more of a wacky arrangement in the second half.
Yeah.
With some weird minor stuff and some discords and things, and it all builds to a crescendo, and then Sam Sweeney came in on the pipes. And yeah, it was.
Oh yeah, there's a big bagpipe solo in it, isn't there?
Yeah. I remember all that. And it ends with the chorus, but it ends with John singing the last line on his own, and then the whole band comes in with a kind of da-da note at the end, which I thought was really funny. No one else seemed to think it was. Everyone else liked it, but no one else seemed to think it was really funny. but I'm always up for a da-da ending. But
yeah, it's good to go for one of those every now and again.
it really is. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so it's on Bellowhead Hedonism as well. Which brings us on to the recommended listening. So obviously we can recommend Bellowhead. It's on Hedonism. It's in John Bowden's Folk Song a Day project, and it's on your album No Man's Fool.
Mm-hmm.
But are there any who else that are not something you've been involved in? Do you have any more to recommend? I've got a few.
Yeah, there's kind of a bunch of things, isn't there? Kind of sticking kind of close to home with Bellowhead. Dr. Faustus recorded a brilliant version of it on their album, which was called Wager, actually.
It was, wasn't it? That's right. Because Dr. Faustus, for anyone who doesn't know, was the quartet. That was almost pre-Bellowhead, I think, wasn't it? Because it was Benji Kirkpatrick and the very much missed Paul Sartin with Rob Harbron and Tim Van Eycken. A kind of almost a pre-fame supergroup in a way.
Yeah,
if they formed now, Paul's alive, that would be like a proper supergroup. Back then, it was just four lads who knew each other playing songs together.
Yeah,
and that version is fantastic. So people are bored to tears with me talking about Gordon Hall, but Dr. Faustus deliberately did a full band arrangement of the Gordon Hall version, which I talked in depth about with Brian earlier. And Gordon's one lasts about 12 minutes, but obviously, Dr. Faustus did instrumental breaks and stuff, but they sang it faster, so consequently it ended up being about 8 minutes. But it's the only time I've ever heard anyone do an arrangement of a Gordon Hall epic ballad with instruments, so I was always very impressed.
Yeah, I think that's a great version, actually, the Dr. Faustus version, because there's lovely moments of that kind of harmony singing. I mean, those four just kind of sang beautifully together, and then
they did, yeah.
Moving out into hearing different voices and things through it. It's really good. It's definitely
so that is essentially word for word the Gordon Hall version, but it doesn't have the line about it does the verse that ends with the small birds would have their fill of the blood, but they don't do that line. They change it to something else, which I was mildly annoyed about. Because if you're going to commit to doing Gordon's version, do the whole thing. But, fair play. Do whatever you want to do and arrangement stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, highly recommend that. That's on their album Wager.
There's a June Tabor version.
Oh, yeah, so there is.
Which I think came out around the same time as that, actually.
2005 it did, you're quite right.
I can't remember the name of the album, though.
I think it's called At the Wood's Heart.
Right.
Of 2005. And that's a version she largely got from Alfred Williams' book, Folk Songs of the Upper Thames.
Oh, yeah.
Tune collected by Vaughan Williams from somewhere else. But yeah, June Tabor, fantastic singer, as we know.
Oh, there's a version on it's like a bonus track on the album Murmurs, the Simpson Cutting Kerr album.
Yeah, that's right. Martin Simpson, Andy Cutting, Nancy Kerr, not Sandra Kerr. Bonus track on the deluxe Murmurs, which is Martin Simpson singing that one.
Yeah.
Which is always worth hearing. And then, there are other ones out. We must mention our illustrious history guest of this episode, Brian Peters, did a fantastic version on an album of his called
Songs of Trial and Triumph.
Songs of Trial and Triumph, 2008. And it's an album of child ballads. And he did the... that's the Cyril Poacher version, and he included the "Hold the Wheel" bit at the end of the chorus, which I love. So absolutely fantastic, brilliant stuff. Love Brian Peters. Brilliant singer who did come in and teach on the degree a bit singing lessons, but I never had her. Was Frankie Armstrong, A really sort of seminal, sort of influential singer. And yeah, still going strong now, and still very highly thought of. She had an album in 1997 called Till the Grass O'er Grew the Corn. And it's on there. Whistle Stop Tour through some others. Back in the 70s, 1979, Pete and Chris Coe on an album called Game of All Fours. That's their singing. They sang the George Dunn version from Cradley. So there's that one. And then usually go through to Martin Carthy, because he's recorded quite a lot. It's on Martin Carthy's very first album, called Martin Carthy, which has Dave Swarbrick on the mandolin on that album. And then that's 1965 debut album. Then there's a live album from 2000 called Both Ears and the Tail, but that's a recording of a 1966 folk club gig of Carthy Swarbrick, which is brilliant, but it includes the most horrendous misogynistic introduction by an MC. And I'm glad it's kept in the recording, but it's absolutely awful. It's quite funny as well, in a pretty bad way. So that's on Both Ears and the Tail. And then there's another live recording of them doing it in America called Walnut Creek, an anthology of live stuff. And then Martin did a different arrangement and different song version of it on the 1971 album Landfall. So there's 4 different Carthy recordings of this, and there's all sorts of other stuff. And we'll leave that there.
Yeah,
so,
it feels like a lot of people have done it. It's
a popular one, isn't it? It's
a popular song, yeah.
It's got a lot going for it, and there are quite a lot of differing versions. So there's a lot of scope for we're not all singing the same version, basically.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of variety within it. So which is good, I think. It's all good. And we'll leave things there. Thanks for coming on and doing this. Very much appreciated. I mean, and your work on. If anyone wants to hear more of you, there's 3 episodes in the Patreon back catalogue. Focusing on Green Broom, Plume and Laddies, and The Gardener. It's all fantastic stuff. And the album that your version is on, No Man's Farm, I assume that's available to buy somewhere.
I imagine it is, yeah. Yes, I think you could probably get it via my website and various other outlets.
Emporiums. Indeed.
Yes.
So lovely stuff. And I'm sure at some point in the future we'll have you back on the podcast. But in the meantime, Rachael McShane, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. A wager with you, my pretty maid. Here's £500 to your 10. That a maiden you will go to the merry green broom, and a maiden you will no more return. A wager with you, kind sir, with your £500 to my 10. That a maiden I will go to the merry green broom, and a maiden I will boldly return. And when she's come to this merry green broom, and her true love was fast in his sleep, with a fine finished robe and a new suit of clothes, and a bunch of green broom at his feet. 3 times she went from the crown of his head, 3 times from the soles of his feet. 3 times she kissed his red rosy lips, but he lay fast in his sleep. She took a ring of gold from off of her hand, and placed it on his right thumb, and that was to let her true love to know that she had been there and was gone. And when he woke from out of his sleep, and his true love had been there and gone, 'twas then he remembered upon the cost, when he thought of the wager he'd lost. 3 times he called to his horse and his man. The horse he had once bought so dear, saying, "Why didn't you wake me from out of my sleep, when my lady, my true lover, was here? 3 times I called to you, master. 3 times did I blow upon my horn, but out of your sleep you would not wake, till your lady, your true lover, was gone. Had I been awake when my lady was here, of her I should have had my will. If not, the pretty birds in this merry green broom, of her blood they should have all had their fill."
That was Rachael McShane singing The Broomfield Wager. And that brings us to the end of the episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch with me, feel free to drop us an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, X, Threads, Instagram and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. On places like Apple Podcasts, that's a star rating out of 5, so a 5-star one is preferable, and there's a review section as well for you to do that. If you're on YouTube, that's a thumbs up button on the particular episode, but if you're not already subscribed, you can hit the subscribe button to get each episode as it comes out, and the comments section there on YouTube as well. And I'm sure it's similar to either of those two systems on wherever you get your podcasts from. All of that really helps the podcast to reach a wide audience, so it's very much appreciated. In the Roud is a media partner to Veteran, the traditional music label. This week's song is included on 3 of their releases. When May is All in Bloom, sung by Gordon Hall, Holsworth Fair, sung by Jean Orchard, and Romany Roots, where it's sung by Viv Legg. You can find these albums and more on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Brian Peters and Rachael McShane. Join me next week for episode 5 of this season. We will be looking at Roud 35, which is child ballad number 39. That's the epic saga of Tam Lin. Joining me on the song history side will be a brand new history guest in the form of Amy Leach, and my singer guest will be Piers Corley. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.